One day I met these two guys. They were in a Range Rover. They were at one of my stops, and I went up to them. I said, "What do you guys do?" Right? Because they were dressed nice and had a nice car, and they were like, "Oh, we're in real estate." The minute they said that, I got excited.
We got Mr. Rob Weissman is a real estate investor and developer turned title partner, bringing years of experience built from building homes and multifamily projects. He's also a partner at Closed Title, and he focuses on delivering a smooth, investor-friendly closings that help agents, builders, and investors grow with confidence. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Did I miss anything there?
No, pretty much covers it.
Yeah, so I love having folks on the show because that have a long experience over usually a couple market cycles. You have a unique perspective, and when you combine that with experience in different aspects of real estate, it's very valuable. There's not a lot of folks that have that experience, and that's why I'm really excited to have you on the show. So now, how did you find your way into real estate?
Does anybody here know who Carlton Sheets is? So this was, I had to be, 19 or 20 years old, and I was watching the commercials about the No Money Down program by Carlton Sheets. And so it was like, get rich quick. So, I called the number and, ordered, gave my mom's credit card and got a week or so later in the mail this set of cassette tapes. And then a booklet with some forms, assignment of contract, stuff that I didn't even, at that time wasn't aware of what it meant. But, I go through the cassette tapes and I'm like, man, all I got to do is get through the cassette tapes and then I'm going to be rich, right? I'm going to make a bunch of money in real estate. So that was kind of the initial seed that was planted in my head, even though for the next, 7 years, I didn't really do anything, right? And the interesting thing, I still have those cassette tapes, right? I have them in a box at my house, so I don't know if they might be worth something.
Do you have anything to play them on?
That was going to be my next comment is you'd have to figure out how to play them. But one of the things that even today is impressionable is that a lot of the information that I learned or at least heard about with those tapes is still valid today, right? It's just intertwined and enshrined in technology and different concepts and, software and technology to find, motivated sellers or, different things like that. So, but it wasn't until I relocated to Houston. I was in the Army for 6 years, and I moved to Houston in 2002. And I was working for Pepsi Cola. I was selling a route, right? So I'd go to different convenience stores or restaurants and sell Pepsi products. And then one day I met these two guys. They were in a Range Rover. And they were at one of my stops, and I went up to them. I said, "What do you guys do?" Right? Because they were dressed nice and had a nice car, and they were like, "Oh, we're in real estate," right? And so the minute they said that, I got excited because it brought back the Carlton Sheets tapes. I wanted to say, "Hey, I you guys are students or disciples of Carlton Sheets." Long story short, they invited me to their office. They had a house that they had bought and renovated in 3rd Ward. And they were in the mortgage business, but they were also real estate investors. So they were savvy about how to finance and purchase property. And the house that they were in, they had bought, they fixed it up, and they were operating their mortgage business. They were mortgage brokers. And at the time, what they said, they invited me, said, "Hey, we'll teach you, right? Come work with us." And I was operating or working as a processor, right? A mortgage processor. So all I did was fill out verification of deposit and verification of mortgage forms and fax them, right? And everything else, all I watched was them meeting with people. They had people in the living room, which was kind of like the lobby, and then they used one of the bedrooms as their offices, and each one of these guys was, putting deals together, right? Loans, and they'd see opportunities to buy houses, and people would come who were losing their house or having some sort of issue, and they'd figure out a way to structure a loan to buy the property and, fix it up or put a tenant in it. And I was fascinated but everything they were doing was like foreign to me. I had no concept of other than what I had, you know, listened to those tapes. But I was very like intrigued. I said, you know what? I don't want to work for Pepsi. I want to do what these guys are doing. So I literally quit my job at Pepsi, not knowing if I was going to make money with these guys or not, and just started showing up to their office every single day. So that's kind of the precursor. After about, I would say 2 years, we were closing out a title company, and I met a lady, first Commonwealth title, and she allowed me to kind of shadow her as well. She said, you should come by the office and learn the title aspect, right? So I'd go to her office and would help with different aspects of processing the title files as they would come in. I leveraged that experience with these mortgage brokers and the title job to get a job at a retail mortgage company. All right, I had an opportunity to apply, and I used that experience on my resume. When I got to that mortgage company, it was like the Boiler Room. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Boiler Room with Vin Diesel. It was literally at the time calling people to basically do cash out refinances, because that was a big thing at that time. And that just kind of fast tracked my understanding about just putting deals together, loans, and just the speed and velocity. And what it also did, it was one of those things that we went through like 2 or 3 days of training, and the branch manager was like, okay, so you got through the training, we've given you everything that you need, you got a week to show us that you can close a deal. So it was like the pressure was on. And, you know, when you're on the phone calling strangers, for the most part, it's very intimidating when before you can say your name, so it's like, hi, my name is, and it's click, right? And so you have to get very, very good at establishing rapport on the phone when talking to people. And so there were literally people were getting the position was like a revolving door. So people would come in, they go through 2 or 3 days of training, they'd get out on the floor, and then people would leave crying. You know, people would leave kind of like, you know, this is not for me. This is BS. I don't know how you guys can do it. But I remember after the first day, I went home and I said, man, I have to make this work, right? I had no other option, because number one, I was not going to go back to Pepsi and basically drive around Houston in the heat selling a route. And so every day I would drive to work, and I'd tell myself, I'd basically create this image of myself being the type of person that could close deals, right? So I created an alter ego for myself, right? So when you're on the phone, they can't see you. So it's like I just became this badass, you know, Vin Diesel boiler room person that could close deals, right? And so after about a week, it became easy, and I would model how I would talk based on who the person that was, you know, on the other side, you know, whether it was an accent or whatever the case may be. And I got really good. I got really good at establishing rapport, closing deals, and became one of the top loan officers in that office. We were, matter of fact, at the time, you know, Patent Title, Ashley, he was running a Fidelity, and that was one of the title companies that we closed at. We were closing, just me, myself, anywhere between 12 to 15 loans a month. And so that experience gave me a ton of confidence, right? Because in real estate and putting deals together, you have to talk to people, right? You have to establish rapport. You have to have confidence. You have to, you know, have a belief in yourself that you can make something happen. And so I worked for that company for about 2 years, did really well. Like, my life changed, right? I was making money, or what I thought at the time was money. Come to find out, I was only getting a fraction, you know, on a closed loan than what people were out, you know, as mortgage brokers. But I had an opportunity, again, meeting people, to work for a mortgage broker, this Jewish guy, who basically brought me into his office. And his office was small. It was, you know, when a rep from Countrywide Mortgage introduced me and said, hey, you need to go meet this guy. So I show up, and, you know, by that time I could afford to buy, you know, like $500-$600 suits. So I show up in my suit, I have my briefcase, and I walk into this guy's office. It was off, you know, Westheimer and Kirkwood. And it was almost like a closet, you know, and he was just sitting there. He had on shorts, tennis shoes, and he looks at me and he just starts laughing, you know, shaking his head. So I ended up working with him for about 6 years. And with him, I learned how to establish relationships with people. Because at the mortgage company, it was very transactional, and I was basically pushing the weight of the company I work for, not me as an individual, as Rob. And with him, because hey, we're not a big mortgage company. His business was based on relationships, and he had been in the business 30 plus years, from owning a huge mortgage company with 50 plus employees to now he was just fine with being a mortgage broker and doing 3 or 4 deals a month, and it was a good living. So that experience was tremendous for me, because once I left working with him, I set up a net branch through a company out of Colorado, and then we had the mortgage crisis, right? And so then it was like, dang, what are we going to do now? And so what happened was, a lot of the people who I'd closed loans with would come back to me saying, hey, I'm in this situation. I can't refinance my house, right? Because during that time period, a lot of the loans that were being closed were like, 228 ARMs, they were adjustable rate mortgages. And so they had no choice but to sell or refinance. But when the market collapsed, it was hard to sell because, they couldn't pay the loans off because the values were low. So through that experience, I learned about short sales, right? Because, they'd sign an authorization. I'd contact the mortgage company on their behalf and was like, hey, so what options exist? And they said, well, you can do a short sale. And I was like, okay, well, what's that? And so they'd give me the process. They'd fax me the paperwork to get the process started. And I found out that the short sale process was a lot like the putting a loan together, right? So you have to put all this paperwork together, fax it, submit it to the lender. They review it. They do an assessment of value, and then they make a decision on whether or not to accept the offer, or they'll say, here's what we'll accept. And once I figured that out, I was like, wait a minute. So if the bank is willing to accept, for example, $100,000, but the market commands that property can sell for $130,000, there's an opportunity, right, between that spread. And so what I quickly realized is that was the opportunity for me. So I got my real estate license, because part of the short sale process was you had to list the house for sale. And the majority of agents that I was working with, right, because I didn't have my license, so I had to partner with an agent. They were your typical real estate agent that just said, hey, let me put this sign in the yard. They didn't understand the process. So I ended up doing a lot of the work and a lot of the communication. So I said, let me just bypass that and get my real estate license. So during that time period, it was about 2 years or so. I mean, I had, at any given point, I had about 50 or 60 listings. And from those listings, I was getting buyer's leads, right? So I was negotiating the short sale. So I was negotiating, 40, 50 different short sales. There was a software at the time called Short Sale Commander, which you could probably Google. I don't know what it's evolved into, but the software was cool, because when I was talking to people that were in that situation, we did, at the time, it was like Google AdWords. I mean, it was a very infancy stage. And so I had, a URL is called shortsalerealtor.com. So the idea was, when someone said, hey, sell my house, stop foreclosure, my website will pop up. They'd call. I'd run them through the process, give them what was at the time, I guess it was eFax. The documents would come into this Short Sale Commander software that was part of, assigned to the property. And from there, I could fax it directly to the lender. So everything back then was fax. You couldn't email, right? So you have to fax the documents, then wait a day or two, call the lender to, hey, did you get the short sale package? And that's how the process would begin. And so we'd have these listings. We'd put, hey, disclosure, short sale, pending short sale, et cetera. Buyers would hit the listing and say, hey, I'm interested. Okay, great. It's a short sale. Has it been approved? No. Oh, well, I don't want to wait that long. Okay, great. So now that's a buyer lead. So I didn't want to run around showing property to buyers, because I want to be in the office, like, when I was doing loans, just processing, the paperwork. So I started recruiting other agents saying, hey, I have buyer leads. So I'd give them the buyer leads, and then I'd say, hey, we're going to split it 50-50, and they'd show those buyers houses. And so it was a really, fascinating time, and it was like a niche that I had carved out for myself. The other thing I did was I was like, man, this is great. So how can I keep these short sale leads coming? So I created a CE class called Short Sales Revealed. It was a 3-hour class. I became a Trek instructor, got the class approved, and I would go to brokerages like Keller Williams and there was no EXP at the time, but Coldwell Banker, all these big brokerages, and I say, hey, I have a CE class for short sales. So for 3 hours, I'd inundate agents with all this process for short sales, and at the end of it, I had a line of agents waiting to talk to me, saying, hey, the class was great. I absolutely do not want to do short sales. Do you take referrals? And I said, I do, right? So I would negotiate, hey, I'll pay you 20%. And so it was just kind of this mushroom of short sale leads. Well, the market gets better, right? But by that time, I had gotten up the courage to say, you know what? Some of these opportunities that investors or people were buying at the time, these short sales and fixing up and selling, I want to do that, right? So I was able to buy my first property, and it was change the tile, paint, nothing crazy, right? And so I knocked that out, did the next one, and what happened as the market improved, the scope of the project got bigger and bigger. The market got better. Some of these different areas, close to town, started trending, and that's how I got into fix and flips. At the time, I had a friend of mine who was an attorney, was a real estate attorney, and he came to me and he says, "Hey, I have $500,000, and I want to do something in the market, and I'm having people approach me saying, hey, you put up the cash, and I'll do all the work, and we'll split the profits." Problem was, I don't know them, but I know you. Are you interested? I said, heck yeah, I'm interested. So I don't have any construction background whatsoever. It was stressful going to Home Depot in my slacks and my polo to buy tile, pushing it out. And I was like, man, how am I going to do this? But luckily I had a friend who was a roommate who was working for a construction company. And I said, well, worst case scenario, I'll bring my friend into the mix. And if something happens, I know I can find him, so because you hear stories about contractors and stuff like that. So I called him. I said, hey, this is what I want to do. And we ended up buying in a neighborhood called Brooksmith. And at the time, they were buying, these 1,200 square foot homes, adding about 500-600 square feet to them, renovating them, selling them for, just under $400,000 at the time. And so I'm driving around trying to find a deal, right? Looking, see somebody in the yard. Hey, do you want to sell your property? And the prices that they were asking, the numbers just didn't make sense. And the reason being is, these homeowners or property owners would see the house is selling for $400,000, and they say, well, I know I can get at least half of that. So every day what I would do is I'd drive up and down the block, right? And I'd write down addresses for, if I saw a house that looked, crappy or whatever the case may be, and I'd put that on my list to either send them a letter or, go knock on their door. But one day I'm driving down the street called Enid. And the day before I'd driven down this block and there was an empty lot, but that particular day there was a house there. And I'm looking, I'm like, well, where did this house come from? And I see it's on blocks. It looks like it had just like appeared. So I get out and there's a guy in the yard, right? I get out and I say, hey man, is this your property? He's like, yeah. I was like, well, where did this house come from? And he says, well, I had it moved here. I said, really? I said, who did that? And he said, Cherry House Movers. I was like, can I get their number? He said, yep. So I called them. I said, hey, what does it cost to move a house? And they're like, well, it depends, how far are you going, this, that, and the other. And I gave them the example of that property. And they said, yeah, we moved it from this location. And it costs, with the foundation, it costs about $12,000. That was, back then. So then I said, well, shoot, what does a lot in this neighborhood cost? And at the time, a lot was $80,000. So I did the math. I said $80,000, right, plus $12,000. And I figured, okay, I got to find a house, not the property, but a house for $5,000. That was like $60,000 less than buying an actual house. So at that point, there's a light bulb. I said, man, I started making lists of every vacant lot in the area. And I go to my buddy and I say, hey, look, this is how we're going to do it. So we were like, okay, great. Where are we going to find the house? So I'm like, well, that's a good question. So here I go. I'm driving, and I don't know. This has to be fate. So I'm driving down Main, going towards 610, and just past Aurora. I think it was 26th Street. On the right hand side, there was a house, and it had a sign on it that said "House for sale, house only." And so I called the number. I was like, yeah, I saw your sign. Are you selling the property or just the house? I said, we're just selling the house. How much do you want for it? $2,500. So I the phone dropped. I was, so I called my buddy. I was like, I got the house. And so we put the deal together, got with Cherry, right? They mapped it out. And I still have the video. This house, my wife was pregnant with my oldest daughter, who's 13. And we were there at 2 a.m., 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Because they have to do it where there's no traffic or anything like that. And we had we bought 3 lots, and that was the first house that we moved to. The property address was 304 Archer. We moved the house, and the architect we used at the time was a guy by the name of Gilbert. I can't remember his last name, but his company is called Bungalow Revivals. This guy does, amazing restorations, not even renovations. And so he did the plans for that first house, and we renovated it. My buddy that worked for the contractor, his company did the work. At the time, I was at the house. I was going to the house every single day, right? Like 3-4 times a day, like trying to see the progress. Like there's no progress, right? The general contractor, the superintendent, was hardly ever there. I was there more than he was. And I was talking to the guys and getting to know them, and really just trying to understand the process, right? Because I really wanted, number one, my buddy it was all his money. I didn't have anything in the deal. It was all his. He was writing the checks. I give him the invoice, he'd write the checks, and I was like, man, I can't fail, right? So we finished the house, and right before we finished the house, I found another house for sale. This was on Aurora, a guy by the name of Michael Colangelo, and he had the same sign, house for sale, house only. Basically, what they were doing is trying to save money from the demolition, right? They were going to build, they were going to develop, and say they were giving time to say, well, if somebody wants a house, they can buy the house or whatever, right? And that's kind of like the Cherry House Movers, the Sight Brothers, JD Drake. These are all house moving companies, like generations. There's only a handful of people that move houses. But at the time, so that was our next project, right? And we moved it to another lot we bought on Archer. And so that sequence, just got bigger and bigger. We renovated. We probably did 6 houses like that, 6 properties where we bought the lots and moved the houses. But what we found, right? So the market's going up. Each time you sell $20,000, $30,000 more, the prices go up. The value of the land goes up. And we were like, man, this is a lot of work. It was hard to pinpoint what an actual budget would be, because once you get into it, like the very first house we did, we try to cut corners and not fix everything. And then you get the buyer that's coming to spend $400,000. And what do? They get an inspection. There was inspectors like Hitterman Engineering. And it's like, well, you didn't fix this, you didn't fix that. So we're like, man, this is a lot of work. So I had the idea of building homes instead of renovating houses, but making them look like the old houses that we were renovating. And that's how I got into new construction, was through that initiative. And from there, it just kind of, the market got better, and it just kind of skyrocketed. I became a member of the Greater Houston Builders Association, because I wanted to separate myself from the other builders, the other contractors. And in Texas, there's no licensing body for general contractors anymore. It used to be the Texas Residential Construction Commission, but after the foreclosure crisis, that entity, it went defunct. So I was like, well, how do I separate myself? Well, I go to the GHBA and I get all these certifications, take all these classes. So now I was on their website. I could put on advertising. And then what happened, people would come to our project and say, I love the house, I don't like the location, can you build for me? And at the time I was like, well, I've never done that. But I was like, yeah, I can build for you. So I started doing a lot of custom homes, right? During a period, there was a lull in the market, like oil prices dipped. And so it was more advantageous to build for someone else than it was to build on spec. And then the market picks back up and we start building again, right? At one point for about a good 3-4 years, I was building 30 to 40 houses a year, just myself and my crew. And then after that, I started looking back at all the properties that I had built, and I wasn't keeping anything. And so it was like, man, and I was seeing the values of these properties go up, right? Homes that I had built or renovated and sold, and what they were reselling for. And I was like, man, if I would have kept half of those houses, you know what I'm saying? I'd be a multi-millionaire.
Don't get me started there. Don't get me started there.
Yeah. So that's where the whole build to rent came. Then at that point, I said, you know what? I'm going to keep these houses. And not only am I going to keep them, but I'm going to figure out a way to build multiple units on one lot. And so like the concept of the stacked duplex came about for me. And I built 15 duplexes in Third Ward that are all stacked duplexes, built in the Heights. I built duplexes in Independence Heights and kept a lot of them, which we still own to this day. And so now it's, we have, I would say probably 4 projects that I'm finishing. I'm kind of like, I wouldn't say weary, but it's kind of the construction for me has kind of lost its luster. I think the last custom house I built was in the Heights on the corner of 7th and Norhill. I built for a client. Actually, it was the second house I built for them. It was about a 5,000 square foot house, beautiful house. And so I have a passion for development. It's one of those things where through trial and error, because I didn't grow up, swinging a hammer or anything like that. Even to this day, I mean, I was, I'm proficient in hooking up my trailer and going picking up material, you know what I mean, and helping people offload it. But, it's not something that I wanted to say, hey, look, I have a part in physically constructing the house. But the aspects of like troubleshooting and figuring out, because there's never been a project that I've done that has gone from start to finish without a challenge, right? There's always been some sort of challenge that I've had to kind of figure out. And early on is very stressful, right? Because you don't know and you just want to get through it and you want to figure it out. To whereas now it's like, oh, okay, I've been through that. I know exactly what to do. I know how to navigate, any issues through the city. I've done a lot of projects. I've probably done 20 projects or so that I've taken over from other people that have had issues, and I have to go in and kind of, figure out what's going on. But it's something that the confidence to start something is, especially there was a period where just me, myself as a superintendent, that's one of the things that I made it a point, because I know a lot of investors, developers, they build a lot of houses, but they go and hire the builder, right? And I always wanted to know firsthand what it takes to build, what it costs, right? Understand how to take a set of plans and get the takeoff and bid all the material, read the plans, be there when you're preparing, forming the foundation and pouring and all those things, so that literally I could quarterback the build of a house sitting here, right? Just, on FaceTime. You understand what I'm saying? That's the confidence that I have when it comes to construction. And I feel like that's a very necessary skill set, especially if you're a real estate investor, whether it's fixing and flipping or even getting into construction. Like when you talk about value add, some of the homes, duplexes that we built, from buying the land to economizing the budget to completing it and then seeing the value that you create and the gap and the margin of equity. I mean, that's tremendous. You go to somebody and buy it already retail, like you don't have that opportunity, right? It's lost because, and then if you don't understand it, it's like, you miss out on it. So for me, that was something that was very important. And I think that, I think everybody, especially your home, like I'm living in the third house that I built for my family. You know what I'm saying? And that's cool when you're walking around and your daughter is like, hey, Dad, what's wrong with the wood floor there? You didn't build it right. You didn't put it in the house right.
It's all your fault now.
It's like,
no one to blame.
It's a warranty item. It's like, I don't know, babe. I'm going to I'll let the builder know. So, and then now to, one of the things that I also did was we flipped a lot of land to other builders. And that's kind of like, when I made that transition to building, there's a gap where we would not only renovate, but there are a lot of projects or properties that we would see and say, okay, we're only going to do these two, but we had people that would call us and say, hey, I'm interested in selling. What do you offer? And then we knew there were other, like in neighborhoods, you get to know the other guys that are, that are doing renovations and they're looking for deals. And so we would, wholesale or sign properties. And then you'd see somebody building and you say, hey, what are you looking for? Or you see the size lot and you see what they did with it, whether they're replatted or whatever the case may be. And then you'd run across a similar lot and you say, hey, I know this guy or that guy that's, interested, right? And so we would flip a lot of land as well. So a lot of that is still stuff that I do to this day in some of the same areas that I now live in and have property and still operate. And now, from the title perspective, it's kind of like coming full circle because all of those transactions closed at a title company. And so at the time, I wish I would have thought about it,
You're your best customer.
15 years ago. Yeah. So
that's why I tell real estate agents too. It's like, and when you're flipping and you're your own customer, like there's no one to get mad at. Like, there's no one that's going to blow you off. Like you agree with yourself a lot more than you probably agree with other people. So, it's not bad when you're your own customer. Like with that though, with your title and lending experience and depth of experience in investing or developing, so you see a lot of transactions. You talk with a lot of agents. You network in a lot of events. What other strategies are you seeing investors use to thrive in the market, or is really development that's kind of the game?
I don't think that's the only game. I think the more creative you can be, the better. Right. So understanding everybody's situation is different. Like right now with everything that's going on, right, we are coming from a period where we had historically low interest rates. Right. And a lot of those people that had low interest rates, in spite of the low interest rates, are experiencing some sort of financial difficulty. Right. And so like the subject to, right, where you can essentially buy a house subject to the existing mortgage that has a low interest rate. Right. You're seeing a lot of that happening right now. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity, especially if you don't have a ton of cash. So some people are taking advantage of that, and maybe they don't have the cash to take over that mortgage, but they know somebody that does, right? Because how they structure the deal and it makes sense, and they can assign that contract, that subject to contract, to an investor and make money, right? To kind of build capital. Right now, it's hard to. On the development side, it's hard to flip land because nobody's bullish on land right now. You know what I'm saying? It has to be a really good deal for somebody to say, yes, I'm going to take the risk to buy certainly raw land, but even develop land. So like in the city, most of my experience is in the city, right? So like, urban infill, we call it, right? They're, neighborhoods that are already platted. It's infill because a lot of these older neighborhoods, there were houses there. For whatever reason, they're not. Homes were torn down, or through generations, the upkeep wasn't there, so they demolished them. Or if the house is still there, it has to be torn down, right? So those lots are easy to develop because there's utility in the street, right? So the risk is not inherently there, but the risk is because Houston's a city with no zoning, right? So what that means is if there's a trend in a certain development type or opportunity, once people figure it out, everybody goes in and there's no stop. So it's like a lot of these areas get overbuilt. So in some of these markets, these submarkets, that's what you see right now. So the development opportunity is kind of like, well, I want to be careful because I don't want to get stuck. So how do you be careful, right? What's the golden rule in real estate, right? You make money how you buy. Right. So if someone can get a good deal today, then great. Yeah, you take advantage of it. But if not, a lot of people put development opportunities on pause. Right. Now, that's not to say that there aren't opportunities. Like there's some markets, like, for example, the Heights. I mean, the Heights, people are still buying, right? Certain price points, certain income demographics, they're kind of insulated to some of the economic difficulty. So like if I'm somebody that's trying to capitalize on an opportunity, maybe I don't, financially, or I don't have the cash to go in and build a, $1.5 million house, but I can find the property in these areas, right? I can find the opportunity. Now it's going to take a lot of effort and work because everybody is looking for the same thing. But hey, persistence pays off, right? I gave you an example earlier about a property that we were able to offer for sale by owner. This was a house across the street from a home that I built for a custom client, and it was a for sale by owner. My wife calls because she's at the house that I built doing I send whenever in the homes that I build, whenever there's a warranty like claim or especially after a year, I send her because I get too kind of emotional when people start pointing out stuff, and I'm like, okay, I'll fix everything. My wife is very like cut and dry. She's like, nope, that's not part of the warranty, so it's kind of like a buffer. So she goes to this house and, she comes out and she sees the for sale by owner sign across the street. It's a house built in the 1930s. It was renovated maybe 20, 25 years ago and has been a rental, but it was well maintained. So she calls the for sale by owner sign and the owner answers and, he's asking $370 for the house. And she calls me. She's like, hey, this is what's going on. And I said, okay, well, ask him if he want. My first instinct was, hey, does he want to list it? She's like, no, I asked him that. He doesn't want to list. He wants to sell it off market. I said, okay, well, let him know that we build in the area, we develop, we have a lot of contacts as well, that maybe we can help him sell his property off market. He's like, great. And so then I call her back. I say, well, ask him if he'll give you at least 2 week, like a 2-week listing agreement. That way, and tell them this, when I send it to other people, I want to make sure that we get compensated for this, right? We have an extensive network of, investors and builders, et cetera. And so he agrees, right? And he agrees. He said, if you bring somebody, I'll pay you 1%, right? $370,000 if you get that price. So then I tell her, let's call some people, right? So we start calling, a list of people we have. One of the companies was New Western that we call, right? Because they're always buying property. And the New Western guy immediately, he's like, I'm on my way to the property. Can we meet you there? And so my wife is like, well, he wants to meet now. It's like, well, go meet him. So he literally, he sees the property, walks through it, and within 30 minutes after that, he sends an offer for $305,000, right? So my wife calls the guy's name is, the owner's name is Twan. And she tells him, and he's like, oh, no, I want $300,000 and this, that, and the other. And he says, well, they can close quick and they'll pay all the closing costs. What do you want to do? So he calls her back and says, okay, I'm going to accept the offer, but just wait, see if you have anybody else, right? So 2 other builders go in the area and they offer slightly higher, but their terms were, not as favorable, the closing time, et cetera. Long story short, we just opened title on that like 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, right? And the guy, Twan, has 3 other properties on the east side. So he tells my wife, he's like, hey, you did such a great job. I have these 3 other properties. I want you to help me sell them as well. So, I mean, it's, and this is the market, right? You're saying it's like there's not opportunity. There's not, it's really just a matter of, taking action and, being bold, right, if you will. And there's some, I think it kind of helped that, we built the house across the street and there's a little bit of credibility. But I mean, you guys know somebody that builds houses, right? You know somebody that's a real estate investor. So it's not like you're there by yourself, but it's just really being, open to the possibility that you can make something happen.
And we were talking earlier too about opportunities ahead. And it was along those lines too. It's right now you have to be a little bit more creative than you used to several years ago to get deals done, to get them under contract, get them sold. And it's those folks that are creative, that are using these creative strategies to basically create opportunities that otherwise aren't there. But those are the ones that really, really grinding, really honing in their systems, honing in their skills. When that log jam in the market finally opens up 6 months from now, 2 years from now, we don't know. But when that happens, those are going to be the ones that everyone's looking at like, how are they doing so many deals? Oh my goodness, they're making so much money. And then like everyone wants to come back in the market again. But are there any other like opportunities you're kind of keeping your eye on, like looking ahead, that you're keeping your eye on from an investment standpoint?
That's a good question. I mean, today a lot of my focus is on the title side, but I think, you know, on the development side, projects that are distressed, right? So there's a lot of builders who they started, right? So one of the things, so like we came out of the whole subprime and, you know, whatever kind of financing you want to call that, right? And and that was more on the residential side. What's evolved from that is this non-QM market, right? These private lenders. I'm not going to say hard money, but private lenders, these nationwide private lenders that specialize in fix and flip and ground up construction. A lot of them, their capital sources are from like private equity funds. A lot of these, as surprising as it is, like U.S. Bank is a big purchaser of these types of loans. The problem is, like, if you get a construction loan from like a Prosperity Bank or a Spirit of Texas Bank, well, now Simmons Bank, basically an FDIC insured bank, they don't want to take the property back, right? Because because they're FDIC insured, it looks bad. It's bad for them, for the regulators to see REOs on their balance sheet. So they're willing to kind of work out certain deals, right, before it gets to that point. These other lenders, they don't have that mindset, right? The minute they catch wind of something not being right, they're filing the notice of substitute trustee sale and they're foreclosing on these projects. So you're going to see, and you are seeing a lot of these projects, right? So when the market's good, the cash flow is there. They're different than a bank. They don't look at your tax returns. They're not looking at your P&Ls. They're not looking at anything. They're looking at, do you have experience and do you have the cash to close? That's it. So when the market is good, hey, this money is just pouring out into the community. Builders are building, right? They're like, you know, going crazy building. The market changes and guess what? They can't sell. The interest is high, right? And so now they get into trouble, right? They're using draws to fund interest and the project stalls. From my perspective, that's an opportunity, right? And there are deals that I've put together recently that fit that space. So from my perspective, that's where there's an opportunity, because there's people with cash. Like, even in this market, there's people with cash that are looking for these opportunities. All the people that go to foreclosure sales, right? They have cash. You bring a deal like this, right? And you look at, you know, if you're driving around communities, you see a project that's stalled, right? Like, write the address down. Let's figure out what's going on with that. Who has the deed of trust? What lender is? Oh, it's one of those lenders. You know what I'm saying? That's an opportunity, and then you can come in and take over the project, right, and finish it, right, at a discount. We closed the deal. Well, I didn't close it, but I connected an investor to a deal. It was 3 homes that were partially built in the Heights, and they were in a distressed situation. I was able to find out who the bank was. They were willing to sell the loan. I connected them with an investor who I met because they closed at the title company. I didn't know that this guy was as loaded as he was, right? But he said, hey, if you have a deal, send it to me. I knew that he was into foreclosures, right? Because that's what he did. And so literally within 3 days after I showed him this deal, he had relationships to be able to go in and buy the loan. And he bought the loan, like this property went to foreclosure yesterday. It's the first Tuesday of September. But he bought the loan with the notice still intact and just worked with that lender's attorney and his attorney to keep that notice intact so they could still foreclose and he could assume ownership without losing time with filing another notice. So what's the opportunity for us? Well, one, I'm not going to finish the construction, but I connected him with a group that is going to help him. 2, my wife will sell the properties, and then 3, the transactions will close at our title company.
Not bad. So I asked the same 4 questions to every guest as we wrap up here. If you could give advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
That's probably save all your money. Don't spend your money. No, I would say to my 20-year-old self is to be more like to be bold, right? To not waste time and find what it is that you want to do, like for example, real estate, and try to align or find those people at the level that you aspire to be, and try to just be bold in connecting with them. I think I wasted a lot of time not having the confidence and thinking that I should be in that space. That had I not, and I was just intentional and bold about meeting these people, that I'd probably be a lot farther along than what I am now.
What book or books have greatly influenced your life?
Training Camp. And I just read the book that Aldrich gave me. Yeah, Training Camp.
All right. First time I heard that one.
By John Gordon. There's a chapter. My favorite chapter, I think it's chapter 10. Or no, it's not chapter 10. I can't remember what chapter it is, but it's basically a 10% rule, 10% better. It's basically, he talks about, the example he gives is someone's asking a Starbucks executive, how are they so successful? And the response was that we're not trying to be the best coffee shop, right? But what we're trying to do is be the best at everything, but only 10%, like 10% better at everything instead of 100% better at one thing. And that resonates because a lot of times I think we want to be better at everything instead of just taking marginal incremental steps, right? In all areas and a lot of areas. So that's Training Camp.
All right. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
I would say just being more mindful about, what I eat, minimizing drinking and alcohol and stuff like that. It's not to say that I don't enjoy it, but I'm intentional about not doing it as much. And then exercise and fitness, so every day I'm doing something to exercise my body. And with that comes just when you're running, I at least 4 times a week I run 3 miles. And it's just something about running that for me, it's one of those things, especially when I'm, have a lot on my plate, or I'm trying to figure out, think about things, when I run, it's like this endorphins. It's just something comes to me. I start thinking, and it, so I really, over the last 5 years doing that has changed, a lot of things for me,
How can people reach out to you?
So I'm here.
That's an easy one. All right. So we're going to open up to the audience for some questions.
All right. What made you choose title at the end of it all?
Honestly, so I'll tell you, I've closed at a lot of different title companies. I'll give you a quick story. I did a deal. It was 16 units on the east side on Avenue C. And I contracted that deal in a self-directed IRA. And the reason why I did is because I wanted to flip it, and I wanted to do a double close, and I wanted the proceeds to go into the self-directed IRA. It was kind of like 80% would go into the self-directed IRA, 20% would go into LLC. And at the time when I put the deal together, I didn't know how I was going to do that. So what I did was I started calling a bunch of title companies saying, hey, can you do this? Everybody's like, hanging up on me or whatever the case may be. So I called O Republic, and I gave them the scenario, and they said, yeah, I think we can do that. And I was like, okay, great. So I got in my car, drove to O Republic on Post Oak, walked in there. The receptionist like, how can I help you? She's like, I want to speak to somebody who can help me do a double close. And she's like, what? And so I'm explaining. So finally she comes back and says, have a seat. Escrow officer comes and takes me into office. I explain it to her. She's just like steadfast looking at me. And I'm thinking, it's like, man, she's going to kick me out the office, right? So it's like, this might be illegal or whatever. And she says, I can do the deal. Send me the contract. And I was like, what? Right? So and I proceeded to do several deals with her, and then a bunch of title companies after that. But one of the things that I've kept with all these experiences, that title companies don't really, at least in my experience, do a good job with understanding you as an operator, right? So I've never experienced somebody from title company call me and say, hey, you just did this deal. I want to understand what's your goal for the next year? Like, what do you do? Do you build? Do you, whatever the case may be, and how can we help you do more of that? Right. So when thinking about title, it was one of those things where I was like, man, how could I do this differently? Right. It's like my experience, and not just my experience, but the experience of colleagues and people around me, business partners who we've been doing business in the same space for, 15, 16, 17 years. And so that's one of the reasons why title is, because I felt like it's an opportunity for me to be that intersection or that exchange where now I can provide my input and my experience, but also meet other people who are trying to do the same thing and then foster this relationship to nurture and grow and do more business.
Love it, love it. Next question.
So how did the Carlton Sheets method benefit you? And did you buy any houses using it?
No, I didn't. Well, I mean, not intentionally. I think that if I were to go back and read some of that stuff, it's like, man, I did that, or that's, but at the time it was a novelty, right? It's like, no money down, and you look at it and you're thinking like, all I got to do is figure out how to come up with the $29.99 to buy it, and I'm going to make money. That's what I think. Why do people want to invest in real estate, right? To make money, right? That's the whole idea. But really, there's so much more that comes with it. You know what I'm saying? Like, had I not been in real estate in the capacity that I have been, I mean, there's relationships that I have that came through that. You know what I mean? If I would have just stayed at Pepsi or whatever the case may be, you don't really get those opportunities. But being able to, like, for my kids, for example, my oldest was in my wife's stomach when we were moving this house, and they have been with me throughout, like walking homes and frame stage, and like their wiring and their psychology is totally different than other kids, right? Like family members, nieces and nephews that I have who are just now in their adult years seeing their parents buy a house, much less build hundreds of houses. You know what I'm saying? So
Keep that though. So you know how like Napoleon Hill, we all look back to him. So I don't know, maybe in another 30, 40 years, Carlton Sheets will be looked at that.
It'll be an AI bot or something.
Yeah, but you can have like the great Carlton Sheets talked about these strategies